Hey everybody, so should we listen to government? How do Christians, how does the local church, how do we respond to the government? Does the Bible tell us what to do? And actually it does. We're going to talk about that because we're continuing our live reading through the book Good News, and today I'll also be emailing out who the winner is of our free copy. If you want to be entered to win a free copy, like a hard copy of the book Good News, make sure you're a subscriber and you fill out the link that's in the top of the description. And today we're going to be choosing somebody, but we're choosing somebody every month until I say we're not doing it anymore, to send out a free copy every month. Okay, so every single month we'll be sending out a free copy, and you can win just by being a subscriber and filling out the link in the description. Okay, so let's look at our reading. How should we respond? I don't know about you, but it's crazy days. Now this is live. We're going live, so there's gonna be some bumps. There's gonna be some hiccups. I might mess up on something, but just want to give you a fair warning. This is live. But I don't know about you. I have been praying about this and struggling through this myself. How should we respond to the government? And before COVID came out, literally like a couple of weeks before it came out, we released this book, Good News. And it's been teaching me a lot about how I should be responding to government, because it's not my thoughts. It's literally, we're just explaining a chapter in the book of Romans. It's what Paul was writing to the church in Rome at this time. And so we're going to look at that, and we're going to see how should we respond. Is there going to be some nuggets in here that we need to adapt our lives to? Or are we doing it the right way? And we're going to talk about that. I really do believe that these next two chapters are very key for what's going on right now. This chapter is about authority. The next chapter is about how we should respond to somebody in our church that we disagree with. And one thing that's going to be very big that a lot of people are disagreeing about is this. And so, next live stream, we're going to talk about, in our local church, how should we respond to somebody who doesn't see things the way we see them, okay? And so, let's jump into this chapter today. We're going to be looking at chapter number 10, okay? And so if you have your own copy of the book, you can follow along, mark it up, or you can just follow along on the screen for absolutely zero cost. And again, that's why we're doing this. It's because I want this to be as free as possible, so you guys can watch through these, listen through them, take screenshots, mark the screenshots up, I don't care. But feel free to follow along. Even if you're watching live, you can ask questions as we're going through, and I'll try to pause periodically and talk to you about those, okay? So let's look at chapter 10, the normal Christian and authority. Romans 13 explained. In the previous chapter, we uncovered the way a normal Christian lives. This is the way all Christians are supposed to live. And friend, if we are not living this way, we are not living the normal Christian life. And if you want to watch that, you can watch our last video where we literally walk through how Paul laid out how we as believers are supposed to live. And friend, we gotta allow the Holy Spirit to birth that in us and live that life. Not the way we think we should live, but the way the Bible tells us we should live, right? And so let's continue moving forward. It says, Paul does not stop with how we are supposed to live in relationships, but he goes on to tell us how the normal Christian should respond to government. And so in this chapter, we're going to look at 3 ways the normal Christian treats government. And so the first way the normal Christian treats government is the normal Christian submits to all authority. God's desire is that every believer submits willingly to the laws of the land. And you may be thinking, why? Well, Paul gives us 4 reasons why we should submit. The first reason is this: God put them there. Verse number 1. I'm going to actually pull up the Bible alongside here just for reference. So you know I'm not making this up, and I'm not just going to be, spouting my own ideas off. So I'm going to pull up Romans chapter 1 over here. Actually, no, we're not in Romans 1. We're in Romans 13, verse 1. Romans 13:1 says this: Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Okay, so let's jump into that. So God put them there. Verse 1 just told us that, right? Did you know that God placed Donald Trump at the time of this publication in power? There is no power, there is no authority, but that which comes from God. When God created man, he created man to be a reflection of himself to creation. He designed man to rule or to order the creation in such a way that it demonstrated God's divine authority. In the same way, God has ordained government to stand in for him and exercise authority as a reflection of his authority. But we must realize this. Their authority is derived or received from God. They have no authority. Oh, I scratched it out. Let me highlight it. They have no authority. They have no authority unless God gives it to them. That's it, right? And God has given government authority. Therefore, since God has given government authority, the normal Christian submits himself. Let's look at some of the words in verse 1. It says this. Subject, right? And that's the word hupotasso, right? Which means under what has been arranged for order. Under that which has been ordained for order. Hey, Brother Gary, good to see you. Glad you're able to make it today. So, hupotasso, under, hupo is under, tasso is that which has been ordered, and we'll see that. Ordained is tasso, that which has been arranged or ordered. That's rules. So he says that let every soul be subject. That means put yourself under hupo, the tasso, right? So do you see that? Government has been tassoed by God, and he orders us as believers to hupo, or to place ourselves under that tasso. And hopefully I did not lose you there, okay? So God desires that believers willingly subject themselves or place themselves under the laws of the land, because God is the one who ordained it. Now, I do want to take a brief pause here. If you do want to listen to this audiobook for free, like we're on Audible, email me at addison@everythingchurchpro.com, and if I have any free promo codes left, I'll let you listen to it for absolutely free. I can't guarantee I have any left. We've already had a lot taken, but if you want to listen to it for free, email me at addison@everythingchurchpro.com and just say, hey, I would love to get a free Audible one, and I'll let you know whether I have one or not, okay? And so, let's keep going. It says this. Christian, you should never get in trouble with the law. I should never have to visit you in prison because you were in a fight or stole something or broke the law. Christians are meant to be law-abiding citizens, citizens, not because the people in government are better than you, but because God has placed them there. That's the only reason we submit, is because God put government in place. Number 2 is this. When you resist authority, you resist God. And that's verse 2. It says this. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. And they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. Okay, so it says the word for ordinance in verse 2 has to do with that which has been thoroughly ordered. Not just ordered, has been thoroughly ordered. Since God put them there, you are rebelling against something that God put thought into. God has placed them there on purpose. So it is impossible for a Christian to say that he loves God and dodge taxes. Say that again. It's impossible for a Christian to say that they love God and still dodge their taxes. A Christian can't say he loves God and yet pick and choose which laws he will obey. Friends, this can be convicting to me. Sometimes I go a little faster than the speed limit, but we're not supposed to. We are not, this is confession time, I guess, for me. But friends, we are supposed to abide by the law, right? It is impossible for a Christian to say that he loves God and be, here's a big one, and this was before all this started happening, ready? Disrespectful to law enforcement. If you are a Christian and you are being disrespectful to law enforcement, you are not acting like a Christian. I will just say that straight up. Respect law enforcement. Friend, Christians should be the best citizens our nation has. Not because they have our allegiance, but because God does. And God asks us to respect and obey them. Number 3, rulers protect the community. Rulers protect the community. Verses 3 through 4. Let's read those real fast. It says, for rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is a minister. That's the same word, I believe, that God uses. No, it's not actually. He's a minister of God. It's diakonos, which we use for deacons, right? He's a minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, right? For he beareth not the sword in vain. That's pretty crazy. For he is the minister of God. He is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Friends, Christians should willingly submit to the government because of their job. The government is there to protect the community. They enforce laws to keep order and safety in our streets, in our homes. I don't think any of us would like criminals to roam free like they have been recently in our streets. That's why we have government, to keep the peace and protect the community from those who would seek to harm it. It protects us both from domestic harm and foreign harm. You see, it's the government's job to be a terror to bad people. So God says in verse 3, if you do what's right, why be afraid? If you don't steal cars, you don't have to be afraid when a cop walks by. If you don't want to hurt people, you don't have to be afraid of the police. But if you do wrong, you should be afraid, because God has given the government the right to take your life. That is what it means by bearing the sword. Okay, so let's look at this. Capital punishment. That's a big question. Right here, he says he gave them the sword. It says he beareth not the sword in vain. So capital punishment was God's idea. Why? Here's why. Because God is on the side of life. Wait, what? Yep, because God values life. Those who take a life must receive a just punishment. And punishments must be equal to the crime. Here, let me explain. Can you imagine if speeding on the freeway or talking out in class got your legs cut off? I can't. That'd be crazy. That wouldn't, because its severity is not equal to the severity of the crime. But on the flip side, if you were to rob a store or murder someone and murder someone on the way out, and then your punishment was to sit in timeout for 5 minutes, that also is not justice, because the punishment is not equal to the crime. Punishments are designed to be equal to the crime to show precisely how bad the crime is, okay? God says life is sacred. I value each life infinitely. And to dissuade people from taking others' lives, they were warned that stealing someone else's life would cost them their own. I want to say that again. Stealing somebody else's life would cost them their own. Justice. When you kill someone else, in essence, you kill yourself. That forces you to think, is this worth it to me? Is the murder of this person truly worth giving up everything? Because if you take everything from someone, it is just for everything to be taken from you. A life for a life. And God ordained government to bear that responsibility. It's not my responsibility, it's not somebody else. God ordained government to bear that responsibility. Where was government created, you ask? It was created in Genesis 9:6, when God gave man the right to inflict just punishments, even up to death. At that moment, he instituted human authority. At that moment, government was born. Number 4, rulers promote good behavior. Christians should willingly submit to authority because they promote goodness. Civilization is built on biblical principles. You cannot have neighborhoods without trust, goodwill, and people obeying the general commandments. Therefore, the government is there to exalt goodness. And Christian, because of that, we should submit. God does not allow Christians to rebel against authority ever, unless, and yes, there is a time when it is okay to rebel, okay? So let's look at that right now. When is it okay to rebel? Let's look at that. The only time God allows us To disregard the government's authority is when the government tells you explicitly to break God's laws. Here are a few examples, and I encourage you to read their stories. We'll talk about them more here than we do in the book, okay? So let's talk about these. Daniel and the lion's den. Daniel in the lion's den. And this is the example he gives us. First, I'm going to read all of these, and then we'll talk about them. This is the example that Daniel gives us. Don't fight back. Do what's right and speak for truth. Accept the consequences, even death. We have the 3 Hebrews in the fiery furnace. Don't fight back. Do what's right and speak for truth. Accept the consequences, even death. Peter and John. Don't fight back. Do what's right and speak for truth. Accept the consequences, even beatings and death. I hope you're seeing something similar here. The Bible is very clear on how we are to rebel. The only time we rebel is when they tell us not to do what God tells us to do. And he tells us to willingly accept the consequences for rebellion, even if it costs us our lives. And so there are some churches right now, especially in California, who are told they're not allowed to sing, but God tells us we sing. And so many of the churches are still singing. But what they should do is when the consequence comes, they accept the consequence, but they're going to keep on singing. That's what we see with Daniel. Let's look at Daniel in the lion's den. He was told, you can't pray anymore. What did Daniel do? He prayed. He prayed, and when they came to take him and throw him in the lion's den, he went. He accepted the consequences, believing God would justify him. And God did. God vindicated him. We see the 3 Hebrews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and we see them. They were told to worship a false god. They were told to bow down to the king's statue. They didn't. They said, we're not going to obey that. We've obeyed in all these other things, but when you cross the line and you want us to go against the ultimate authority, no, it's not going to happen. So they didn't. But they accepted the consequence. They were thrown into the fiery furnace, believing God would protect them if he wanted to. But they were going to obey God no matter what. And God did vindicate them. We see Peter and John preaching the gospel. They were told not to, yet they still did. They obeyed God rather than man. They said that, you judge whether it's better to obey God or man, judge ye. And they were beaten. They were thrown in prison, yet God vindicated them and freed them and then sent them back to preach. This is our example. When the government tells us to do something that is anti-God, that's the only time when God says, yeah, you can rebel. But you've also got to stand and take the consequence, even death, and trust your life to me, to God. I will repay evil. And that's why in Revelation we see those under the throne. They're looking at God saying, God, when are you going to repay us? And he says, just wait, just wait. So friend, that's what we need to be. We need to leave our hands in God. We need to leave our lives in God's hands. Do what he says no matter what, even if it costs us our life. The next one says this. This is how the Christian is to respond to wicked laws. It's not easy. We're not told to take up arms. This is something that Americans probably wrestle with. I know I have. I almost didn't want to say it here, but look, this is what the Bible doesn't tell us, that we're allowed to take up arms and go fight for things. But maybe we'll have to talk about America and how it's different than the government here at the end, okay? Actually, let's talk about that now before I forget. Okay, so in America, we were told in the Declaration of Independence, I believe it is, that it is our right, it is our duty to throw off such government. When the government is bad, it says it's our right, it's our duty to throw off such government, to provide new laws, okay? And so we live in a conundrum. We live in a special country, a country where our founders foresaw the need for throwing off bad government. And they also knew what Christians would struggle with, right? This. And so the government tells us, the authority tells us that we are allowed to overthrow it if it becomes corrupt. And so we live in an interesting, I want to say paradox, but in an interesting country. A country that foresaw this, knowing that we're not allowed to, by the Bible, just go and throw off government willy-nilly. And so the government said, hey, I give you permission to throw me off if I become corrupt. So that's interesting, okay? But we are simply to do what God commands and accept what consequences come our way, even death. All right, number 2, what does the normal Christian do? Not only do we submit to all authority, but this is a fun one. The normal Christian pays all his taxes. Woo! This is not fun, but God commands that every Christian pay taxes. Jesus was asked if they should pay taxes in Mark 12. And it says this, "And when they were come, they say unto him, Master, we know that thou art true and carest for no man, for thou regardest not the person of men, but teachest the way of God in truth. Is it lawful to give tribute to Caesar or not? Shall we give or shall we not give?" But he, knowing their hypocrisy, said unto them, Why tempt ye me? Bring me a penny that I may see it. And they brought it. And he saith to them, Whose is this image and superscription? And they say unto him, Caesar's. And he tells them in verse 17, Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And they marveled at him. This is an important statement. Give Caesar back his image, and give God his. So who is the image of God? You. We are each made in the image of God. Caesar is not the real king, but you are not fully devoted to him. You submit to him because your real king commanded you to, and that is why you give him back the portion required. But since your real king is Jesus, you give God more than just money. You give him your whole self. It was interesting to me that God calls the government his ministers in verse 6, which is the same word used of angels in Hebrews 1:7. They are literally God's servants. And it is for that reason God asks us to pay taxes. Let's define some words in this text. Tribute is a yearly tax on persons or real estate, which is like our income and property tax. Custom is an indirect tax on goods, like sales tax, okay? And so I have here, let me look over here. Verse number 6, For this cause pay ye tribute also. That's the tribute. For they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. And so the normal Christian pays both the sales taxes and our income and property taxes willingly and cheerfully because God asks us to. That's why we do it. Number 3, the normal Christian supports the government. God tells the normal Christian to give the government fear and honor there in verse number 7. Fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. The word for fear here is the word where we get our word phobia. It's phobos. This combines the idea of reverence with the idea of terror, but it's mainly the fear of punishment if you do wrong. He also commands that the normal Christian honor the government. That means to hold it in high regard, to view its members as important. And that's not how many people view the government today, but it's the way the normal Christian should. This is God's blueprint for how the normal Christian should interact with the government. But it applies to all authority, parents, teachers, bosses, etc. We should willingly submit ourselves to authority, knowing that it is God who placed them there. I'm going to highlight that. We should willingly submit ourselves to authority, knowing that it's God who placed them there, and he did it for our good. Will you commit to living this way? Because Jesus asks it of you. You will if he's your king. You will if you love him. And you will if you want to live the normal Christian life. Well, that is the chapter on government. And I hope that was a blessing to you. That was convicting to me. But it's amazing how the Bible has the answers for everything we're going through. And so I encourage you, if you haven't listened to the rest of the book, you can go back and listen. I've live streamed every single part of the book. You can go back and listen to. We'll finish up the book. I believe we might have a chapter or two left. But you can listen to the book. If you would like a free copy of the Audible, again, I have a limited number that I can give out in the U.S. and then some in the U.K. And so let me know where you're wanting to listen from if you do email me. But if you'd like that, so you can listen to it in your car while you're driving, that's there. Or you can listen to this for free as many times as you want. But I hope this was a blessing to you. I encourage you to read the book of Romans, though. Don't just read, or listen to what people say about it. That's not as important as the Bible itself. The Bible's more important than anything we could say about it. And so I encourage you to actually go and read Romans for yourself, and study it out, and see what God has there. And I hope that will be a blessing to you. I know it's been a blessing and a challenge to me. Again, Brother Gary, it was good to see you. This answers many questions I've been wrestling with lately. I know, same here. But it was good to see you on the chat. And anybody else who was watching live, I'm glad you're here. I really am. And I hope that you guys have a great rest of your day, living in these uncertain times. Next time we do live stream, we'll talk about how we should react with each other in the church. And it might also help us with some of these questions, okay? So I will talk to you guys then. And until then, stay safe and stay encouraged in the Lord, because He's not done with us yet.